Okay, hello everybody again. This is Paul Sims speaking to you from Pharma in London. Thanks again for being on time. Let's get going. So, as you can hopefully see on your screen, today's webinar is called The Ultimate Plan for Your Patient Solutions in 2020, with a subtitle, Prepare to Deliver Meaningful Value. And I suppose the emphasis that I'm trying to place on the title for this session is actually on the word plan, which might surprise you. We're trying to make this webinar perhaps a bit more practical than we usually do. Notice that it says 2020, not 2025 or 2030. So the aim is to really figure out what solutions can be delivered in the relatively short term. What can we do to make progress for what we do in that near term? And actually move the needle. So it's a popular webinar. Almost 1,000 people signed up. So it's obviously a topic we already know is very popular. And we're going to be talking about, the role that digital should play. We're going to be talking about how we can plan. But we're not going to go sort of gung-ho into it and just talking about implementation only. We still need to take some care in identifying the space that we need to play in. Let's be honest, there's a gap between what exists on the front line, care services that our hospitals and providers are delivering at the moment, which is obviously very patient-centric, and then what we have, which is still very therapy-specific, very company-specific, and these so-called patient solutions that we've so far offered aren't necessarily filling the gap in between what our providers are providing and what we could be providing. So we do still need to make progress in terms of figuring out how to be more patient-oriented and potentially even more collaborative between different pharma companies. I'm not going to go into it too heavily now because one of our speakers, Jim, is going to go into that in a bit more detail. But we're going to talk about these things. We're going to be talking about getting buy-in. We're going to be talking about critical success factors, and we're going to be talking about measurement. So stay tuned. So if you look at your screen now, you will see some happy smiling faces. This is the people who are going to be presenting to you today. In the top left is Jim. Jim, we've had on a few webinars before. There's a good reason for that. He's been an excellent speaker and actually has been leading S3 for more than 30 years now. It's a great example of a business that has the heritage, yet also the futuristic design. He's absolutely up to the minute. Jim is taking part in a lot of work to do with digital therapeutics at the moment, as well as the work that we're going to be talking about today. And his company really is an expert in patient solutions, also in behavioral science and understanding the real meaning behind these things, not just the technology. So fantastic that you could join us again, Jim, and really pleased to have you with us. Just under Jim, we have Doug. Doug is Vice President for Global Health, Patient Experience and Technology, which is really the perfect job title for this session. He's working with UCB, and his team is really responsible for partnering with business units across various geographies to define UCB's patient experience goals, build those capabilities, and actually ensure that they are sustainable. So he's been doing a lot of work there. He's also been bolstering the company's efforts to improve culture. Cultural aspects as being absolutely critical to this as well. I'm sure we'll hear a bit about that later. And really pleased that you could be with us, Doug. Thank you. Jacob. Now, Jacob's actually coming to us more from the R&D side of our industry. He's the global head of digital development and the co-founder of Biome. You may have heard of Biome. It's based in California. It's a very exciting part of Novartis, is a very exciting part of our industry, frankly, and they're incubating some really exciting companies, but they're also really figuring out some more interesting ways in which we can develop drugs, obviously in a more patient-centric fashion, but also taking advantage of what technologies exist. So Jake's been doing that for just over a year and a half now, and hoping that some of the experiences he's learned there will bear fruit in this discussion. So again, thank you, Jacob, for being part of this. Emmanuel, you've probably seen Emmanuel on a stage, not just ours, but he's been a speaker on several stages recently. Also the author of a book, which I've read myself, called The Future of Healthcare, which is a great book, by the way. And he is known for being a forward-thinking and recognized authority on the convergence of digital technologies and healthcare. But also, and again, if you read his book, you'll see this, he's got a strong understanding of what's required in order to be patient-focused as well, really across the pipeline, right the way from clinical drug development all the way through to late-stage commercial as well. So great that you can be with us, Emmanuel. And then there's some guy called Paul at the end. Let's not talk about him. Let's go straight on to Jim, who's going to introduce a few slides to us. Are you ready, Jim?
I am indeed, Paul.
Fantastic. Here you go.
Great, and actually let's jump straight to the first slide. So good morning, good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are. And I guess when I was thinking about this topic, I was trying to think about what might be a useful way of thinking about planning solutions for 2020. I think most of us are familiar with the business model canvas. So this is a kind of an adoption of that canvas that we've created specifically for patient solutions. And what it's about is trying to get to the heart of what a patient solution plan is about. I think we're all familiar with the too many cases where, if you like, technology comes first and the purpose of the patient solution comes afterwards. So the purpose really of this canvas is to try and identify the important upfront questions that you need to have clear before moving forward at all with any kind of solution creation. And I'm going to talk in detail about this canvas later, but just to kind of highlight the elements of it. So on the left-hand side, really, there is, what the why and the what aspects of a patient solution. It answers questions like, what's the purpose? What's the strategic intent? What unmet need are you addressing for various stakeholders, clinicians, patients, or others? Who do you need to be involved in it? And then fundamentally, what does the solution do? And very importantly, what's the minimum adoptable product? And for me, this is really crucial because I guess what we've seen a lot of is that there's a lot of solutions being created, but the adoption levels are relatively low. So identifying what the minimum product that will really be adoptable is kind of a key concept. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to go through that canvas in detail. But before I do, I thought it would be worth taking a look at the kind of landscape for pharma patient solutions so that we're all talking about the same thing. So if we can just jump to the next slide there, Paul, please. So the question is, what do patient solutions really mean for pharma? As we all know, anything with the word patient solutions, digital, etc., and the whole area is very rife with jargon. So let's take a look at the landscape in which these solutions operate. So pharma have traditionally created hub services, and particularly these have been around specialty medications. And those hub services typically revolve around creating benefits and assistance programs, thinking about logistics of distribution of medication, providing some perhaps visiting nurse support, some regulatory oversight, and looking at areas like education, engagement, and adherence. And that's where patient hub services have largely kind of come from traditionally. At the other side of the diagram, on the other side of the spectrum, you have provider patient solutions. So this digital health revolution that we're seeing is not just about what pharma are doing. Obviously, other players, healthcare providers, payers, medtech companies are creating various different services and solutions. And typically provider-based solutions, they come from the perspective of optimizing patient outcomes. They tend to be quite patient-centric. A lot of the time they focus on helping this transition from the hospital to the home and helping patients essentially manage and cope with their disease better while at home and help avoid emergency room visits. So where this new breed of pharma patient solutions is operating is really in between these two spaces. And these are services that are technology enabled, that are typically focused currently, I would say, on optimizing therapy outcomes through creating solutions that include solutions around self-management support, around disease and therapy monitoring, around sometimes providing clinical and monitoring interventions. And they use things like digital therapeutics, they use things like connected devices to gather information from patients, and they use some digital medicine concepts. So this is the space where most of the pharma solutions, patient solutions that we're seeing created are operating in currently. If you just go to the next slide, Paul. And I guess the challenge in the space that we're operating, and I think it's important to be kind of upfront and clear about it, is that a lot of traditional pharma hub services, they come from a perspective of being quite therapy focused. They're around supporting that specific therapy and ensuring that patients have access to it and manage the taking of that therapy. On the other hand, from the other direction, provider patient solutions are much more typically patient outcome focused, and they typically are independent of one specific therapy. And from a clinician perspective in the center, clinicians who are following typically complex care pathways for patients and helping manage patients who have complex conditions, they can be reluctant to adopt solutions that are very therapy focused, for a very simple practical reason that if they've got patients on a range of different therapies, then that potentially involves them engaging around services and a number of services for their patient cohort. And if you look at it from the patient perspective, similar challenge. If patients obviously do switch between or get switched between therapies, and as they do, they don't really want to be switching between one patient service or patient solution or application that they might be using to another. And also, they typically have a number of challenges around symptoms with their condition, and they don't really want to have a range of applications on their phone that they have to coordinate. So that's led to essentially, I think, a solution adoption gap, and that's one of the things that we'll look at later on how we might address. If you go to the next slide, Paul. So I guess this is just emphasizing then the kind of the aspects of this solution adoption gap. So you've got clinicians who are often not willing to invest time for solutions that are really only about supporting a subpopulation of their patients. That results in those solutions and those services not really becoming part of and integrated into a care pathway, which is a critical aspect in terms of adoption. And that in turn then means that the providers, the institutions, the hospitals that support and provide the environment for the clinicians are often quite unwilling to invest the time to integrate these types of solutions and services into other systems and services like EHRs, for example, which in turn then leads to more challenge around adoption. So that's the central point that we're trying to address. And this is where I think the patient solution canvas can come in. So if we jump to the next slide, so let's look a little bit in more detail at this. So if we take the first part of the patient support canvas, which is highlighted on the screen, the focus there really is on the why and the what. So from a strategic intent perspective, we're asking, what's the business benefit? Just because it's a patient solution, I would say, doesn't mean that there can't be a business benefit for the pharma. In fact, there has to be, or else it won't be sustainable inside the pharma organization. What's the core purpose? Is it for gathering real-world evidence? Is it for improving and influencing patient outcomes? Is it for differentiation purposes? What's the real purpose of the patient service? And of course, there can be a combination of purposes. Third aspect is, what does the success look like, particularly for the minimal adoptable product? What are the KPIs for success in year one, which often is really around engagement and adoption with the solution and with the service? And then what do I need to actually get that patient solution, the budget for it, to get that approved? Do I need to build an ROI case for it? Or is it a case that actually the corporate strategy is set up and the brand strategy is set up in such a way that what I'm doing is actually just very consistent with that brand strategy, and it's less reliant on a hard economic ROI business case that's being built up? Then as we move across the canvas, it's looking at what are the unmet needs that we're actually addressing. What's in it for patients? What's in it for clinicians? What's in it for providers? What's in it for payers? Whatever group of stakeholders your service is intended to support and engage around, there needs to be some value in it for those stakeholders, or else they won't participate and the service will fall down. You also, I mean, these services are operating in a competitive space. So if you want your service to be adopted, what similar services already exist and are available, and are they better than the service that you're going to create? So there needs to be a good reason for your service to be adopted. And then, again, moving to the right then, so what fundamentally does it do? Is it about self-monitoring? Is it about behavioral interventions? Is it about enabling a better connection between patients and clinicians so you get more active clinical monitoring? Or is it about incorporating some digital therapeutic interventions into the service that can help improve patient outcomes? And then the last piece then is who's involved? Who are the internal stakeholders? Who will you need to support it internally? How will it be funded? Will it be funded centrally, or will it be funded by local operating companies? And who's going to really be the champion of it? So these are some of the kind of key why and what elements. And if we move to the next slide, and we start taking a look at the how piece. So earlier we mentioned this minimum adoptable product, and this is, I think, a key concept. So what are the services? What's the scope that will deliver that initial adoption? If you underdevelop that, if you underscope what should that minimum adoptable product is going to be, then it won't achieve the necessary adoption. If you overscope it, you'll probably be looking for too big a budget, and you'll be guessing as to what's going to really be valuable to patients, because you need that feedback in order to hone and develop on top of what that minimum adoptable product actually is. You also do need a vision as to where the service is going to go, and you need to be clear on what the success criteria are for that first product, that first version, that first minimum adoptable product. A key element that, certainly in our experience, we see, I'd say, a lack of early attention to, but it's very important, is how do I plan to operate the service? Is it a service that's intended to be specific to the therapy, or is it broad enough that it's suitable for patients with the condition, no matter what therapy they're on? Or is it even broader than that, and it's suitable for patients who have that condition but may have other comorbidities to deal with as well? Is it going to be own branded, or is it going to be provided at arm's length by a partner, essentially? And again, I would say we're seeing a trend towards more arm's length solutions where pharma companies are increasingly saying, actually, it's probably better if the service is provided by a third party, but in some way partnering with the pharma company who's acting as a kind of a sponsor for it. If there is a pharma company that's acting as a sponsor, is it going to be a single pharma company, or is it going to be multiple pharma companies? When we look across different treatments and different conditions, like in oncology, for example, typically there are combination therapies. So do you look to get a number of pharmas cooperating to create a service that's going to be most valuable to patients? Is it going to be a service that's going to be delivered out of the cost of doing business, or is it intended to be financially self-sustaining? Is there a revenue model around it? And will there be a central solution that's rolled out across multiple territories, or will it be a central blueprint which is heavily localized per territory? And again, there's different pros and cons of each solution. And then where is the first launch country going to be? Will the same approach work for each territory? What support will I need from the local OPCO? Have they committed that support before I start? And who's going to fund the ongoing operational costs of these services if they're going to be sustainable? And then the final piece at the bottom is really about what support do I need to deliver. And if we just jump to the next slide, just to highlight that, we're looking at internally, what are the groups? And we know pharma organizations are complex organizations, and there's many different stakeholders. So what role will the medical review regulatory teams play in the service? How will the service get promoted, and through which channels? How will it be part of or become part of the broader marketing of the brand or the service? And what launch support is going to be required from the different local operating companies? So that they're the internal kind of considerations. And then the external consideration is, am I looking for a partner or a vendor? Do I need a vendor who's going to implement what I want, and I'm going to own, manage, and market the service? Or am I looking for a partner who will develop a service, that I provide input to, but will operate that service independently of me and provide maybe some analysis of the results and the data from the service back to me. So again, there are a variety and a spectrum of different models in that space. So that's the theory piece. If we just jump to the last couple of slides, and just to take a kind of a real world example, because again, there's a lot of theory in the few previous slides. If we take a real world example, so this is a service that we've been involved in developing. And it's a service which is around monitoring and tracking essentially disease progression while patients are on therapy. It's for a rare degenerative genetic disorder. And in this case, the product that the service is supporting is a hospital administered therapy. So at a top level, the solution overview is it's for the assessment and monitoring of disease progression. From a benefits perspective, clinicians get a set of tools that help them carry out standardized assessments, and they have an ability to visualize the results from those assessments. And similarly, caregivers and patients get some tools that enable them to report about how they're doing in the real world also. That enables the sharing of data across multidisciplinary teams, and then it also supports patients and caregivers in understanding how their treatment is going and how their progress is going over time. It also then supports regulatory and reimbursement requirements for gathering real-world data. And if we just jump to the final slide, how you might construct a business or a patient solution planning canvas for that service, and this is an example that we did for this specific service. Again, we captured the strategic intent, which is around the global infrastructure for consistent real-world evidence gathering for the disease. We looked at the unmet needs from the stakeholder perspective, and we identified how clinicians would benefit, how patients would benefit, and how the sponsoring pharma company in this case would benefit. We outlined the key elements of the solution. In this case, the stakeholders it was a medical affairs initiated program. There was a lead region funding it, and then there was localizations that were essentially driven per territory by the local regulatory requirements in specific territories. When we looked at the minimal adoptable product, it was essentially creating a full suite of the relevant assessments. So having one or two assessments wouldn't be good enough. In this case, there's about 6 different assessments that are required, and providing that in a kind of secure and regulatory compliant data management environment, and making sure that there was the confidence amongst clinicians that was the case. The rollout was in a territory where there's a high level of early genetic screening, which means there was early identification of patients, which meant the tracking was more valuable. And the market model in this case was we operated that service essentially as a third party. So again, that's just a kind of a quick overview of a specific solution, and I guess the considerations that we see that should go into patient solutions for 2020. So this is a tool that we've used many times, and we think it's very useful in terms of getting to the heart of what a patient solution is about. So with that, maybe I'll pass back to yourself, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. That was excellent. It was really great to see you talk about it. I've personally, been a big fan of using canvases for starting up any kind of venture, and it's really great to see an adaptation that you've created there for patients. You didn't really mention, Jim, one of the great advantages of these canvas models, you can often write sort of 2 or 3 alternatives in a short period of time, and really figure out very quickly what the best options might be, and circulate that around for feedback and things like that. So I think you've created a very practical and very useful little device there, which so I must commend you for that. And it's not just me that thinks that. I've got about 20 people who've written in during the course of your thing there saying, please, can we have access to the slides afterwards? So yes, you can. Don't worry, this is being recorded, and we will send this to you afterwards. You'll be able to re-listen. You'll be able to share it with your teams. And that's obviously very useful information from Jim there. I've even had a couple of comments from patients who are listening in saying that they think that would do a great job as well. So yeah, keep those questions coming in over the course of the next few minutes, please. It's the only way to make sure that we answer your questions. So I want to hear from all of you really what you're thinking and what questions you have. But the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually ask you guys a a multiple choice question. So actually, if you look at your screen right now, you will see a question pop up on it. Here we go. Really, this is to try and understand what you as an audience are trying to really, what is the main driver for you in creating your patient solutions. So this is more of the what. Jim just talked really very much about the how. So, you can see the 5 options. Are you trying to generate data or real-world evidence to better understand the impact of therapy? Are you trying to generate it to support your access and reimbursement processes? Are you trying to improve patient outcomes and or adherence? Obviously, that's a bit of a catch-all one there. Are you trying to catch up with or differentiate from your competition? You see this as a way of differentiating yourself. Or finally, is it just in your DNA? Is it part of your broader strategy and identity? And that's the primary driver for it. So I can see that just over half of you have voted so far. I'll hold that open another 3 seconds. So 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much there. So let's have a look at the results. As you can see, we have a winner, which is over 50% of people saying it's simply improving patient outcomes and or adherence. So I suppose that's no big surprise, and improving patient outcomes is useful for many of the aspects that we're talking about here, as well as obviously being useful for patients themselves. So perhaps no surprise there. And what I think I'll actually do is go straight on to the second question. So have a look at your screens, and this basically asks you another flavor, shall we say. So on this one, I'm allowing you to choose more than one. So take note of that. What type of patient solutions are you planning in order to meet your goals? So you've obviously just talked about your goals. What are you doing to get there? So we've got 5 options that hopefully should cover a lot of what can be done. Self-management support for patients via digital solutions, behavioral interventions to influence therapy adherence, tracking digital biomarkers for disease progression, quality of life, providing oversight and insights to clinicians on patient welfare, so helping HCPs. And again, enabling clinicians to diagnose, plan, and deliver care. So there's a slight nuance there between those two. So be honest as you can, which ones that you're genuinely focusing on over the next year or two. And I can see we've got about half of you voted again, clearly the good awake half of you. I'll hold it open 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. There we go. Thank you. And I think this time you'll see a slightly more even spread, less for the digital biomarkers for disease progression. That's perhaps more suited to a more R&D audience. We've got a slight bias on today's audience on the commercial side of the business, so perhaps there's a reason there. But the rest are all, between 45 and 65, and relatively even. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a flavor of, firstly, who's listening, and secondly, what the industry is focusing on right now. At this point, I think I would like to open it up to our panel for the first time. So welcome, panel, and I'd love to find out what you've heard from either Jim's discussion or from these poll results that you've got on your screen, as to what really has surprised you, or perhaps you'd almost like to emphasize. So I won't be sort of shepherding you all, but let's just start with Doug, as you're next on the list. So Doug, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Paul. I think when I look back at the canvas, I started jotting a couple of notes and things that, as we're preparing for 2020, to also probably include or even to highlight. One was who's a part of those teams that you're using to deploy or to prepare. So in many cases, we find that it's a mix of medical and marketing, but we are a little light on the functions and the operations. And yet the challenges that we've faced in trying to execute and move with speed is to ensure that we are considering the risk, we are considering ethics, and we're bringing the rest of the organization along. One of the challenges from a cultural perspective for us is that from a marketing perspective, we're much farther advanced in our thinking, but it's bringing along the rest of the organization that is a little bit more mired in the traditional ways of working. And how do we begin to break through? And it leads to the other one that I wanted to highlight as well, which is with the idea around do we own or do we partner or do we sponsor when we think about some of these solutions and in the new year? And one of the challenges there is we have a tendency, I guess it's a challenge for us, but how do we partner with some of these smaller organizations and not continue to treat them like a vendor? A lot of the startups where we're getting access to some of the new ideas and the new concepts have been operating in a very different environment than what we currently traffic in the pharmaceutical space and life sciences. And so they are not held down by a lot of the risk and a lot of the compliance and things of that nature. So how do we work with them and we don't actually suffocate them, but we enable them to thrive and grow, and we are partners. And those are a couple of things that we look at pretty consistently as we're trying to prepare for the new year. Those are two things that I would want to highlight from that list that I think are pretty important.
Thanks, Doug. Great summary there. So Emmanuel or Jacob, who wants to share their thoughts next?
Yeah, I'm happy to. This is Jake. You know, Paul, as you acknowledged in my introduction, I'm more in the R&D space, but getting more exposure to commercial every day as we work with teams as part of my role in the biome to help develop some of these solutions. And one of the things I was reflecting upon as Jim was giving his presentation was just the looking at 2020, the advice I would have is really to spend more time developing the canvas, really understanding the problem. One of the things that I've noticed in speaking with a lot of teams is that there's often a lot of deeply held beliefs built up from years and years of experience that they've had in their given roles. But I think that those deeply held beliefs need to be challenged. They need to evolve, and the resulting thoughts need to be codified into a meaningful problem that has a very clear and crisp root cause of a problem they're trying to solve. And the other thing I would just want to say, actually having been a patient myself, is that these aren't only patient solutions, right? And I think that was also implicitly acknowledged in Jim's presentation. They're physician solutions, they're spouse solutions. In my own case, my wife was managing more of my care than I was at a certain period of time. So you need to look at it from multiple stakeholders and really understand what is it that you're trying to solve, and how does it solve the real problem at hand there for those stakeholders.
Great. Manuel.
Yeah, sure. So since everyone has talked about the canvas, I think I'll focus on that second poll question. That was very interesting to me. So I've worked on the R&D side, med affairs and commercial side, right, across the board. And I think that particular question that talks about tracking digital biomarkers of disease progression and quality of life is actually, to me, one of the key areas that we should focus on. And from my strategy perspective, that's something that I'm honing on. And the reason is a lot of studies that have been done, whether it's cardiovascular disease or MS or multiple conditions, the most important thing that actually changes clinician behavior to actually use the product is based on the patient quality of life, right? And that's that's something that in research we haven't done a great job at capturing up to date. In multiple studies that we do, we depend on like patient-reported outcomes that are based on questionnaires that are subject to recall, right? And for us to power these studies, we need thousands of patients, and this takes a very long time to do these kind of studies, and delays how long we bring a product to the market. And by the time we bring a product to the market has probably changed. And so for me, I think that's a very key area. So if you look at like recent developments in our field that we've all been very interested in and following, if you look at the partnership between Johnson & Johnson and Stanford and Apple, for example, right, looking at the Apple Watch predicting atrial fibrillation. These are digital biomarkers that improve quality of life. And you could do early intervention. That the same thing is happening in MS. You know, Roche is doing something similar.
Sorry, Emmanuel, you've gone very quiet. We can't hear you. I think you.
From my position with the industry, I think that's a key area that is not necessarily just the research side, but this also becomes relevant in the real evidence side as we show value of our products to the real world and actually get market access. So I think that's a very interesting area for us to
thank you, Emmanuel. I'm not sure if you could hear me, but your audio was sort of fading slightly in and out there, so we missed a few bits towards the end. So just not sure if you were sort of looking away from your microphone there, but just be aware of that for next time, maybe.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
No problem, no problem. Yeah, we can hear you now. We can hear you now. And we heard most of what you said, so no worries. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say thank you for what you've just shared there, and I'm going to come to audience questions in just a moment. So please send some of those through, and I will definitely focus on that. But I have already had some questions, and it's also something that Jim mentioned when he was going through the canvas about this notion of producing more collaborative solutions with other pharma companies, with your competitors, for the sake of patients who obviously often have to subscribe to multiple apps or multiple services. And one of the, hearing some background noises there, I'm afraid. But one of the, I really want to sort of see if we can tackle this on the head. We often skirt around it at various conferences and things like that. And so I'm going to ask the audience to sort of give us a bit of a sense of where we actually are now, or where people actually are. So take a look at your screen again. How willing and ready is your company today, and obviously I'm asking the pharma companies to reply to this one, to produce collaborative solutions with your competitors for the sake of patients? Can you select either heavy collaboration with other pharma on universal solutions? By that I mean you've already got something in existence. You've already formed formal partnerships with other pharma companies, maybe just one, but maybe several, to produce universally appealing patient-focused solutions. Number two, you're planning this, but you're yet to actually implement these collaborations. Number three, focused on patient solutions with stakeholders, i.e. non-pharma companies, and that's where your primary focus is. Or fourthly, and perhaps this is deliberate, you're focused on patient solutions independent of others. You're just trying to think about patients. Sorry, somebody's got some background noise, so I'm going to have to mute our panelists just for a second while we finish off this question. Okay, let's have a look at the results, can we? Well, actually, no, I'm not going to say look at the results because I can see that only 35% of people have voted. So I'm going to give you 3 more seconds. So please get those votes in. 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, I got a few more in there. Okay, so this is the state of affairs as we see it right now. Actually, a significant minority of people are doing collaboration with other pharma, but it's still, of course, only 10, 11%. 90% of us are yet to do so, according to this, whether deliberately or not. And as you can see, over a third of people focused on purely patient solutions independent of others. So I'd actually quite like the panel to discuss this before we go to the audience questions. So I'm going to try unmuting you, and hopefully we can avoid the background noises this time. But I would love for you guys to comment on this and to maybe give us perspective as to how easy this is and where you each are on this development cycle yourselves.
So I'll step in on this, Paul. From a UCB perspective, we are focused today a lot more on the patient solutions with the stakeholders, with the patients and the patient organizations as kind of a starting point. We do recognize, and there is conversation around collaboration with other pharmaceutical companies, with our peers, and obviously beyond research and thinking about from a patient perspective, what we've talked about is a little bit more around the data. And recognizing that we all are getting access to different streams of data, and how could we build a central repository where we could begin to be more open with the sharing. So if we use biomarkers, as Manny talked about earlier, and recognizing where we are able to collect some of the real world evidence, how can we begin to share that and make that an open discussion. But some of this that I've found since I've been with the company, though, a little bit of his legacy in a sense that in many cases we are a house of brands instead of a branded house. And so it goes back to something that Jim mentioned earlier on in the conversation when he talked about the challenges that patients have with migrating from one solution to another, and the pickup rate with respect to the apps or the patient solutions that are available as they move from one branded therapy to the next, is that's where we have a significant drop off. But yet as an organization, even within our company, we have a tendency to develop things on a branded scale instead of developing them on a more disease scale as well.
Yeah, and this is Jake. Just to take that one step further, given what Doug just said, given that a lot of these patient solutions manifest themselves as very brand specific, it then becomes a challenge to collaborate with other pharma companies. I mean, it may or may not be a cultural thing, but simply a timing thing. These patient solutions still tend to be very much sort of a bolt-on or an afterthought to the main sort of development focus of collecting enough evidence to get it to market. And these just occur over different time frames. I think that though that we do need to move to an era where looking at expectations of different healthcare stakeholders, patients, physicians, I think we do need to find that, that balance of really being able to deliver on something, a solution that cuts across brands. And I think there's a lot of opportunities if we look at analogies in other industries to make this happen. I think though pharma in the past has tried different formats of collaboration with mixed success. We tend to go very quickly to the sort of consortium model, which also tends to become an overly complicated way of collaborating. So I think we really do need to look at new ways of collaborating to deliver things in a more meaningful way, in a quicker way to our stakeholders.
So what's interesting, and just to quickly jump on that too, is some of the things we're starting to see with the patient organizations, and it plays into this idea of the rise of the platforms, is that where will patients go to get their care? And are the patient organizations, or is there a third party that steps in and creates that environment, much like an Amazon or an Uber, where we can actually go in, and then that's where we may find from a disease specific that these are where a lot of these solutions will get organized, and so that the patient will be able to log on and then have the ability to move from one solution to another, but be able to retain their data as being one of the critical pieces there too. But we're starting to see this conversation around platforms as being a way to, because I think you're right, Jacob, one of the challenges is that in many cases, these solutions are bolt-on and added after the fact. So it's more or less, we're going to launch, we need to add these solutions versus thinking a little farther out. But it's also going to change based on where we'll be getting our care from. And as platforms continue to grow into our space as well, recognizing that that's probably where we'll start to see those connection points happen faster.
Yeah, and I know Manny's done a lot of thinking about this. I'd love to get his thoughts, but one of the things that I'm really getting more excited about is some of these new business models emerging with some of our smaller partners that we're looking at is this recognition that we need to do a lot better job as a society of being able to allow patients to collate and port their data just to improve continuity of care, because we all recognize that this is a much more mobile society than what it was 30 or 40 years ago, of course. And Doug, to your point, does that rise of that type of model where companies are starting to come in and figure out the problem of how to collate data and develop basically as a side product of that patient communities to do so, does that become a delivery channel or an aggregation for us to create more interoperable platforms for them, so that the solutions that we're providing, hopefully maybe at some point in time, it could almost be like the app store, where it's just as easy to kind of get one app versus the other. And ultimately, I know we'd like to get away from having to download different apps for the same problem, but at least that's a step in the right direction.
No, I think so.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, go ahead, Manny.
Sorry, it's Jim. I was just going to jump in a couple of quick comments. So the first is, I mean, I think I rather than the app store analogy, for me, it's more thinking around the care pathway. So when you look at a care pathway for a complex condition like, say, multiple sclerosis, and you look at the different points at which patient or clinician solutions that could be provided by pharma or by others can influence and help in terms of care coordination, education, support, adherence support, symptom management, etc. It really stretches across the care pathway. So I think it is probably more about, rather than providing a range of options at any one point, it's around more thinking about how do you provide services and solutions that support the care pathway. And what we have seen is that the facilitator in some cases of those types of solutions are clinician or patient-led networks that, let's say, get support from a number of different pharma organizations, but essentially it's a kind of a clinician-driven solution that evolves from that, which can be then supported by multiple pharma. So I think that's a way by which these kind of, if you like, multi-pharma sponsored solutions can be more holistic and address challenges across kind of an integrated care pathway. And I think ultimately that will be the most valuable for both clinicians and for patients.
So it's interesting, Jim, so we look at partnering with pharmaceuticals, but there's even examples now where we're finding life sciences companies are partnering with the payer as well as the provider to look at how to deliver better therapy. And so one area where it's happening is in oncology. So is this something that it's not a space that UCB operates in, but it's something that we're keeping our eye on and aware of, but looking at how those partnerships are beginning to come about and recognizing that there's not only the molecule itself, but there are the supporting solutions around the molecule. How do they get introduced to the patient at what point in time? And then also there's a payment component to that as well. And so starting to understand not only the partnerships with other life sciences companies, but even the other partnerships, whether they be third party or with other players in the ecosystem, on how to deliver all these different facets of care.
Yeah, and I do think that's where...
I think there's some good examples of like collaboration. One good example for me, I mean, I used to be an artist, with Jake for coming J&J. It's like having like companies like Vita Health, for example, Jake, that is part of the Biome, right? And it's also part of your lab. And they have care models around patient care. I think the biggest challenge actually partnering with payers or with third-party companies or with other pharma companies comes around the business model, right? So as Doug said earlier, if you don't test these things earlier and actually have a business model where you can include these care pathways or other digital solutions around your product in your phase 3 trial so you could get in your label, it's kind of hard to actually scale this out. We actually were commercial, right? So you have to then generate data to then go back in and then support the reason why you need to do this. Otherwise, you can have a solution around your particular product that provides value, because then you get fined, right? It looks like there is this anti-kickback statute that comes in. So there's a legal challenge when it comes to that. So to me, I think partnerships between the UCB and Novartis or J&J, for example, around a care path solution that we could all fund that brings value to patients irrespective of independent of our particular products could be actually a natural way to go. Where we could fund such things, and then it's drug neutral, but actually brings value around changing behaviors, because behavior changes is not dependent on the chemistry or the drug, right? So those kind of things that could bring value around our services, and is neutral and could help us from the legal and regulatory pathway, will actually help us scale this more.
Thank you. Emmanuel, your audio is still not perfectly clear, so I don't know if anything's changed since we were preparing for the call at the beginning, but just be aware of that, and if there's anything you can change at your end, that would be amazing. This is a really good discussion. I'm enjoying this a lot. We're getting some good audience questions in, so I'm going to come to those if that's all right. So I shall read out a few, and thank you, by the way, to the patients who've been commenting. I really appreciate that. It makes a huge difference, and really interesting to hear your views and support on this. What is the percentage of investments pharma companies devote to the development of patient solutions? Do you foresee that this percentage will keep increasing? Now, I know it would be very hard for any of you to actually give a number on that, because in theory, everything should be focused on patients. But I think we could probably answer the second part of whether or not we believe it's going to continue increasing. What are the typical lengths of a patient support program? How can the industry address patient solutions that are relevant before the medication? Can you give an example of digital biomarkers? That's in reference to one of the earlier questions. And then lots of comments about how, particularly from the patients, on how they're quite pleased to see the shift that's actually going on within our companies. So do any of those questions strike anybody as being something they can answer?
So I can tackle the first one. I mean, obviously not being able to assign a value to it, Paul, as you mentioned, but you know, the focus and the understanding of what it means is certainly changing, and the focus is continuing to grow. And the recognition that the experience that we're creating and the solutions that we need to create to develop, not only to develop the right experience, but it's interesting. It's a question that was one of the first audience questions, which was, why do we do this? Certainly from an outcomes perspective, but a lot of it, if we think about it, what's required as we continue to advance the science is access to more understanding and data. And in order to access the real world evidence, we need to have some listening post or some channel out there that is actually working with the end user. And so, you know, that's another thing that even from a research perspective, the recognition of the power and the importance of connecting with these populations, delivering these kinds of services, not only because we know that they're delivering the outcomes and they're essential, because it's not just the molecule, it's the molecule and it's that and that is a really big component, but it's also from a research perspective, as we continue to examine subpopulations, access to that level of data will be required. So it's, you know, one person once said to me, we know what questions to ask and we know the algorithm. What we haven't thought about is how we're actually going to get access to the data itself. And so those are some of the things that are continuing to power and propel us as an industry.
Okay. Thank you very much, Doug. I really appreciate that. We are fast running out of time, only 7 minutes left. Obviously, some more questions coming in, and probably could answer some more of those, but I really want to also just focus on a couple of things to do with, you know, what we said at the beginning of this session, which is to get this up and running, get this in motion. So if you look at your screens now, I've got another question for you. Again, this is really for the pharma company people who are listening in. What are the biggest challenges in securing budget approval? So we're moving on to the practicalities now of actually making these initiatives happen. What is the actual thing that you need to do in order to do? And I realize that you might want to choose several of these, but I'm forcing you to choose only one. So it's the one that you think is the biggest. Is it articulating the value and ROI to senior stakeholders? Is it getting brand team buy-in to the patient solution? Or is it getting local affiliates to buy into patient solutions? Is it solving the compliance and regulatory and implementation hurdles? I'm sure we'd all say yes to that, but is that the big hurdle in getting budget approval? And then finally, having to specify the partners and delivery model right from the outset. We've talked a little bit about delivery model with the collaborations that we've just talked about. Is it necessary to figure that out before you can do anything else? So I'll hold that open another 3 seconds only because we are running out of time. So 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much, everybody. Let's have a look. And I was sort of hoping this wouldn't be the answer, but unfortunately it is. So it's still compliance, regulatory, and implementation that takes over half of votes as being the number one culprit, according to most of our audience here. Whether or not that's true or not, I don't know. Many people say it's an excuse, but it's clearly on the front of people's minds. Okay, one more question. I promise it'll be the last one before we finish. And that's to address a topic that we talked a lot about when we were preparing for this session, which is culture. Do you believe that your company has the right culture in order to see through the implementations that we've been talking about today? So either, number one, you've got a no matter what patient-focused mindset. In other words, absolutely you have the right culture, and your teams will see it through, irrespective of whether or not they even have formalized initiatives. Leadership is focused on culture, but we're not there yet. So at least you are very aware of the problem and trying to make it better. We're reliant on bottom-up initiatives from individuals and teams. So the answer to that really is sorry, if you select that, you effectively mean no, you don't have the right culture yet, but there are initiatives going on nonetheless. Fourthly, despite your good intentions, perhaps you've got some practical plans in place, you believe that your culture will or is holding you back. So that, I guess, is a no. And then finally, we're yet to really even focus on the patient solutions. So I shall hold that open another 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Let's have a look at the results. Okay, so we've got a bit of a mishmash here, but 41% choosing the leadership is focused on culture C, are aware of the problem. But I'm quite positive. I think we've got nearly a quarter of people on the believing that they've actually made it to the right place here, whether that be locally or generally across their companies. So I'm actually feeling quite stirred by that performance from all of you. So well done there in getting to that point. We've only got 3 minutes left, so there's really only time for one more comment from each of our panelists. I wonder whether or not you want to make any final, emphasize any final points, things that we have addressed or haven't addressed, or you want to comment on these results. So let's go one by one, shall we? Who wants to go first?
I can go first. This is Jake. So I would say on the last poll that we just did, it's great to see sort of the cultural acknowledgement and that some of the people have really made great strides. I would say we've got to just continue on this journey. I think we have to recognize that healthcare in general is evolving very quickly. And I think it's really about introducing more of a startup mindset and agility into our individual teams throughout at least Novartis. And, I think that's what's going to really allow us to adapt to this fast-paced environment a lot better than perhaps what we've done over the last decade or so. So happy to continue the conversation around that at any point in time.
Well, Jim's canvases, I think, will hopefully enable some of that agility.
It's absolutely a
few of us can use that.
Start. Yeah.
Great. Who's next?
So I'll jump in. I think. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm actually pretty encouraged by the second last poll, which said that the regulatory and implementation challenges were the biggest barrier. Because in a sense, that means that the motivation for doing it is there, and people are trying to figure out how to go about creating these solutions. And they've got over the why, and they're kind of onto the how, essentially, which I think is a good sign, and it's consistent with the last poll, which is really around that leadership support for it. And I think that's what we're seeing as well. So I'm encouraged, I suppose, by the feedback from the audience.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, this is Doug. I would agree, Jim, that certainly looking at the last two, and the fact that if we look at that second to last poll, it's not surprising that we were thinking about budgets, that's what is coming up on the radar, because it commonly seems to be the barrier as to why we are not able to do the things we want to do. But sometimes another thing to consider as well is that some good or perfect can be the enemy of good. And so when we think about some of these solutions, let's just we need to start to test and learn in the market. We need to understand what works. And so a lot of that is how early in the development of the molecule itself and the life cycle can we begin to introduce these ideas. And Manny talked about that a little bit with respect to how do we start to introduce these in the clinical trials, because that's how they'll begin to build the level of trust that will be necessary to move forward.
Thank you. And Emmanuel, I believe you have the final word. Or not, as we can't hear you. I think you've muted yourself, Emmanuel. Oh, maybe I've muted you. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can unmute you. Emmanuel, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Ah, there we go. I apologize. That was my fault, not yours.
Yeah, because I was speaking the last time and I realized that's not him.
And your audio sounding better than it has done already. So, yeah, it's your final word.
Yeah, correct. I agree with everything Jim, Doug, and Jake they have said. I think one additional point with addressing the compliance and regulatory question would be to get your regulatory and compliance folks to stop saying no, but have the mindset of telling you how you can get things done as opposed to how it cannot be done. So I think that'll be helpful.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a very nice point to end with, Emmanuel. So thank you so much. I want to say a huge thank you to the 5 people in front of you. This has been a very interesting session. I'm really sorry to the people. We got quite a few questions in right at the very end, but we are unfortunately out of time. Maybe we'll see if we can get them answered offline somehow. But really appreciate your time. please do write in before you leave with suggestions for how we can progress from here, what topics, unanswered things that you would like to hear more about, what you'd like to hear about next time. Please do send that in. I'll keep the webinar open for a couple of minutes after I finish talking. Do please come along to one of our events. You can see the two of them here, where we're going to be talking face-to-face a little bit more about these things. The patient summits in Europe on the left, USA on the right, and hopefully some inspiring figures in the background there for you. Really appreciate your time there. That's the end of my slideshow. I want to say another thank you, though, to Jim at S3. S3 in general have been a fantastic partner in making sure this webinar happened in the first place, and indeed made sure that we got some really interesting topics covered. And of course, we have to give him a big thumbs up for the Canvas model that he explained as well. So thank you, Jim. But thank you to all of our speakers. Really appreciate it. I hope to see you at one of those events face-to-face very soon. And look forward to seeing you and hearing more about the great work that you're doing as a result of all of this. So thanks very much, everybody, and have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.